Producer here at the Red House Project. I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very excited to be partnering with Brave New present Suppressed and Sabotage, The Fight to Vote, followed by Q&A with filmmaker Robert Greenwald and Red House team member Shepard Sosi. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, the Red House Project is an Indigenous and ally-led studio whose primary goals are to uplift the works of Indigenous creators by providing educational resources, storytellers, and producing spreadable content that is community-driven and ethically developed for global audiences. We ask that you please feel free to send us your questions in the chat during the screening or Q&A session, and be sure to tell others that you're watching this live. Lastly, if you'd like to learn more about Red House and support our work, please follow us on Instagram or Twitter at Red House Series, or check us out at our website, redhouseseries.com. And thank you, and please enjoy the program. I'm going to turn everything over to Carmen.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so thrilled to partner with Red House to present Suppress and Sabotage, The Fight to Vote, as Native American voices are certainly welcome and needed in the conversation around voting rights. My name is Carmen Samuel. I'm the programs manager for screenings here at Brave New Films. And we have a screenings program, which means we want you to screen this film. It is completely available for free. All you have to do is visit www.fight2vote.org, and you will get all the materials to your inbox. So without further ado, please enjoy the film and stay tuned for the question and answer with our very own team members, Shepard, and then also Robert Greenwald at Brave New Films. Thanks so much. Enjoy.
They do not want this Black woman to vote.
My state doesn't want people like me to vote.
Florida does not want my voice heard.
They don't want my community to vote and win.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Voter suppression and race is as intertwined as anything in our country. The fight that Black people have had to be full citizens in this country, to have a voice and a vote.
We've seen this over the history of our country. People of color, Black people, have had to fight for their vote. You think about this experiment in self-government, one person, one vote. But we've always had to fight for it. Here we are again, fighting for what's basic.
We're now in a major election year with the 2022 midterms this fall. But before voters head to the polls, state legislatures may be changing how you vote.
Driven by the big lie, driven by Donald Trump's claims of a stolen election, we see states across the country passing laws that make it harder for some people to vote.
This is the #1 continuing threat to American democracy.
If you want to understand how voter suppression can actually impact the outcome of the election, just go back to 2018 in Georgia in the governor's race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams.
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomason, Georgia, Upson County, and I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they close the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was on a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black section go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem there.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
Got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on election day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls means.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the posts we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters, because if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands of purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000. No idea they could vote.
Battle is brewing over who's been removed from the voter roll.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you, as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics, specifically and disproportionately, target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick, and I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I've did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at a U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date, and I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. She admitted that yes, they did mess up. It was their fault, but there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook and, like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about. 40 cases, not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you? I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do.
The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long, through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door, that's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'ma be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork,
had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID.
Wow.
So she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match. And Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, now all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drives on campus, within the community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not gonna be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. So little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know now? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote.
It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait.
5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
Have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, hashtag stay in line.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
Hi, this is Christine from Gwinnett County Elections.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see, there was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
The voter suppression that we saw in Georgia for the 2018 election between Kemp and Abrams was really just a precursor to the voter suppression laws that we're now seeing across the country.
In 2021, there have been 19 states that have passed over 34 laws to restrict access to the ballot.
They're all based on the same big lie of voter fraud that Donald Trump has been pushing. The most notable ones are the swing states.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed new voting reform legislation into law. The law includes limits on drop boxes and changes to how people sign up for vote by mail.
I've been voting by mail since I moved to Florida. We don't all work 9-to-5 jobs, so it's really nice to be able to vote by mail. I missed out on a pivotal city council race last year because I did not realize that I had been removed from vote by mail and I did not get any notification. Unfortunately, I will have to re-enroll every cycle now after each election is over. Your average voter is not going to remember to re-enroll every single year. It makes me quite angry and supremely frustrated.
What it does is move the goalpost yet again in a long line or a game of voter suppression that has been taking place in Florida for so many years.
The Republican-backed election reform bill is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. The bill bans 24-hour voting and drive-through voting.
I loved the drive-through voting experience. It was safe, it was secure, it was convenient, and very efficient. You vote from the comfort of your car. I drove others to cast their ballot, and for some, it was the very first time ever. And had it not been for drive-through voting, they probably would have never voted. After the 2020 election, the Texas legislature passed bills to ban drive-through voting. And that is what we're dealing with here in Texas. They want voting to be as difficult as possible, so you won't do it.
A major Supreme Court decision on voting rights. The conservative majority upholding 2 Arizona voting restrictions that opponents claim would unfairly result in racial discrimination.
One criminalizes the collection of ballots by third parties. The other requires election officials to throw out ballots cast at the wrong precinct.
I have about 300 family members. I feel like this family is pretty large here in Yuma. For some of us who live down in the counties, that would be about anywhere from 30 to 100 miles away from the nearest polling place. Some of my family members are disabled. Some of them cannot drive miles away. Some, don't have access to, vehicles. My family has voted the last couple of years with people collecting ballots. Somebody goes to your door, collects your ballot, and collects them, ships them off to whatever polling location there is. With the new restrictions on collecting ballots, that is going to restrict almost hundreds of my family. It's silencing the votes of many, many rural Arizona people.
This morning, Georgia's governor has signed a controversial bill rewriting the state's election rules. It will limit absentee ballots in early voting, restrict ballot drop boxes, and impose new voter ID requirements.
The last couple of elections, I did mail-in voting as well as drop box voting. The new voting laws in Georgia restricting drop boxes, restricting mail-in voting is very repressive. I have multiple health issues, as do many other people. This would severely restrict my ability to vote. I don't know how long I can stand in line, to be honest, so I will be involved in efforts to challenge that.
If 2021 was the year of rampant voter suppression by Republican legislatures, 2022 is the year of voter subversion.
Election subversion actually tries to prevent the mechanics of elections happening. And it could be anything from partisan poll watchers coming in and intimidating someone from their participation at the polls. And it could also be very much of identifying ideologues to start viewing those election officials.
Both Democrats and Republicans who defended the integrity of the 2020 election have been purged from their position. And 163 Republicans who've amplified the big lie are running for statewide positions with authority over elections. This is akin to giving a robber a key to the bank.
I call it election sabotage, because really that is what these laws are designed for. They're designed to allow partisan officials to sabotage valid election results.
This insurrection has now taken root in our states. If the response to increased participation by communities of color, by young people, by women is to restrict their access and impede their participation, our democracy is not safe, it is not sound, and it is not resilient.
We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We had record turnout in the United States of America in 2020, and that tells me that people are awake. They understand what's happening. They're going to participate, and they're going to fight for their right to participate.
We're in the eye of the storm, and we need every single American to cut up with that same amount of energy that we did in 2018 and 2020.
Keep yourself educated about what's going on in your state with any voter suppression or election sabotage laws that have been passed. Educate your friends and family, your coworkers, your community. Make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
We have to put pressure on those that we've elected. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. We should be burning their phone lines up right now around voting rights.
Register people to vote. Register your friends, your family. Talk to everyone. Become the vote captain of your household.
Join a local organization in your community. Get involved locally.
Become a poll worker. Get trained.
If you don't like something, you can either volunteer or run for office.
We can't fight these issues alone. We have to be organized and we have to be engaged.
What's at stake is electing people who look like us. What's at stake is getting policy passed that will help protect us from these types of laws in the future.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself. On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We've got to make democracy together.
From sea to shining sea.
Oh, I am on. Oh, excellent. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Supp22, and I will be leading the Q&A with Robert Greenwald, the director of Suppressed and Sabotaged. Thanks again for being here. I don't see any questions from the audience just yet, so I'll ask the first one, if that's okay.
Sure.
Robert, this film depicts the voter sort of landscape of Georgia, the state of Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the stories that didn't get included that you sort of wished were, and if so, if there's any grassroots movements that maybe you would like to highlight tonight?
First of all, thank you for taking the lead and helping to organize this. It's really a pleasure to work with you and your friends and colleagues and partners and all assorted others of the many, many people who've joined the screening tonight. And in terms of the stories that didn't make it into the film, the sad and terrible and infuriating truth is that this started out as a 3-minute video, maybe 5, because we heard something was going on in Georgia and Stacey had the election taken away from her, or there was some shenanigans. And we began to research it. And the beauty of having Brave New Films, the amazing women and men who make it happen, is that we can move quickly. We're a nonprofit, so we didn't need to say, can we make money by doing a short video? So we went to work quickly after we heard, as many people did, that something was rotten in that election. And Shepard, I cannot tell you the experience viscerally, intellectually, emotionally, as person after person from the small but mighty Brave New Film staff kept coming into my office pre-COVID and coming in with these stories of patriotic Americans who were doing nothing wrong but wanting to vote. And I was having this almost out-of-body experience. I said, wait a minute. People died for the right to vote. People gave their lives for the right to vote. Are we not fighting that same damn battle again? And we are. Only, as Dr. Anderson says in the film, it's not people behind a curtain or with a white robe on. It's out in the open. And so the film that was going to be a 3 to 5 minute film built and built and built. And we wound up putting it out, and then we wound up doing another version. And now you see the most current version today, which we hope everyone who's watched it will participate in showing the film. It's free because of the wonderful donors we have. And it's on Facebook, and it's on YouTube, and it's on Twitter, and it's on TikTok, and it's on Instagram. And you can get an email, you can get a study guide, you can get a reflection guide. So we spend a lot of time and energy so that every one of you can participate, which is ultimately what you're supposed to be able to do in a democracy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. And there's some questions coming in from the audience. One is that, is there something that someone in the state of Washington can do? And this is asked by L. Brady. Thank you. How can someone living in Washington state help people in Georgia, for example, or other states whose voter integrity is at risk, like Arizona or Florida?
Well, I think the answer I give, probably similar one to what you would say, is there are grassroots groups in every single state. And it's real important to get involved with and support those groups, both on the very local issues, on the very local concerns, and strengthening those groups who then collaborate and work with and find ways to help people, just as you said, in Georgia, in Arizona, I think somebody said there've been like 40 states that are trying to or have passed suppression laws. So we have our work cut out for us. I'm certainly not the ultimate expert in every state's laws, but I know that using our phones, using the internet, using the desktop, using our telephones, there's tremendous resources available all over the country. And what they need is every single one of us. There's that great line I quote all the time. Democracy is not a spectator sport, meaning you don't sit there and watch it, you get involved. So I hope that Brady, and each and every one of you seeing the film will help you motivate and activate to get involved locally, work with your local group, find people that you're in sync with, and then those groups are collaborating and they're doing so much good work these days.
Absolutely. There's a lot of good work happening and coalitional work, right, between Black voters, African American voters, and certainly Indigenous voters as well. And voter registration for the 2020 election was up in all of those respective populations. And in the Native vote, there is a question about the the suppression of the Native vote. And if you look back at the history of the Native vote, there is a historic evidence of suppression happening in terms of Natives getting even recognized as citizens in the U.S. That didn't happen until 1924, which should have given them full and equal rights to vote then, but it took several decades later to actually for a lot of Native peoples to actually have the right to go to a polling station and vote, and that's because of states' rights. So there are a lot of I guess there's a complicated web of jurisdictional obstacles that you have to address if you're a Native voter. So again, those are ways that the Native vote, for example, are being suppressed, and you see how in Georgia, rural voters, are having issues getting to polling stations because of the long distances that they have to drive. That also happens in Native communities. They're very rural, and sometimes a polling station won't be readily available to you to go vote.
Yes, very true. And it reminded me, and of course we've talked about it a lot, and we talked about it some in the film, but the notion of systemic issues, systemic racism. It's not an individual finding one person of color that he or she hates. It's a system set up, designed, funded to stop people, primarily of color, from being able to vote. And that's all the more reason it's important that every single one of us makes a commitment and a decision as to what we're going to do. If it's 5 minutes a day, if it's 5 minutes a week, if it's 5 hours a day, there literally is something every single person can and should do.
Thank you, Robert. We have a couple more questions from the audience. And this is, I'm not sure who this is from, but it's, are there any plans to change this for the fall midterms, the election? And I think that's referring to sort of some of the suppression tactics that we saw in the film in the state of Georgia.
Well, the good and the bad news about film is, unlike an email, they take a while. So And we're not a news organization. So what do we try to do? What we try to do, and if I had to say one thing that Brave New Films, as a small nonprofit media company, does, is we put a face on policy. Many people do policy. There are great white papers, there are books, there are studies, there are academics, there are advocacy groups. But our contribution is putting the face so that everybody can connect and feel, that's me, that's my relative, that's my family, that's my friend. So the people you saw in the film, it took us months and months to find them, to interview them, to film them, to edit them. So we're not able to quickly spin the way a news organization is, but we have found that people use the film and it becomes a taking off point for discussion and for organizing. What's different? What's the same? What's worse? I mean, every day there's another story in the newspaper about the efforts and work that the right wing is doing to prevent people to vote, from intimidating poll watchers to filing legal suits. So we're not able to add each and every one of those things, but Carmen, who runs our study program, our screening program, has done a great job of study guides, which you can get when you sign up for a screening. They're free, that help you lead a discussion. Reflection guides that for places of worship to help you lead a discussion. And it's through those guides and those conversations that the film pivots to be, unfortunately, more relevant than ever for the midterm 2020. And we do have a goal, and you all can help us, which is a minimum of 1,000 free screenings before the 2022 midterm election. So if everyone watching commits to one screening, you will help us move towards that goal. And then when the midterms are over, assuming we're able to be successful with the fundraising, we will immediately begin to work on the 2024 presidential, where we will be doing a version of what we're seeing and what your person who asked the question is referring to. There are many, many stories that we want to tell, and I hope we will be able to tell, to make people aware this is not something that's going away.
Absolutely, and we do have to show up and make sure that we are doing all that we can to make sure that we're up on our registration, that we will be counted on the rolls when we get to polling stations. We have one question on actual Native American voter suppression. So I'll go ahead and ask that. This is from Carmen. What can folks across the country do to help fight disenfranchisement of Native and Indigenous voters? And that's a great question. And I think this is an issue that doesn't get a whole lot of press. But if you look at Native-run or Native-focused newspapers like Indian Country Today, you will see that there are many articles written about the voting experience for Native American folks in Indian Country, and that's across the U.S. But in my home state of Arizona, the Native vote really showed out in 2020 and helped to turn that state purple. And that was the first time, or I should say blue. And that was the first time that the state of Arizona had voted for a Democratic presidential candidate. And there are estimates of the Native vote that showed out during that election, and it was somewhere around 70,000 votes. And that's huge for the state of Arizona, where there are 22 federally recognized tribes. And the question is, I guess the answer would be, figure out who your federally recognized tribes are in your state. and go to the Native American Rights Fund website. They have a lot of great information on new legislation that's now in review in the Senate and the House. It's called the Native American Voter Rights Act, and it's actually part of a larger umbrella act that's called the John R. Lewis. Let me make sure I'm saying this right. The John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So the Native American Voting Rights Act is under that, and it really is being put forth to address those sort of, like you were saying, Robert, the systemic sort of issues that really hold back Native voters, and that is access to polling stations, access to broadband that actually, they can go on and register to vote online using their phones or what have you, and really working to also combat things like gerrymandering of districts. In the state of Arizona, that happens a lot, and you can imagine why. There are 3 counties in northern Arizona that intersect the Navajo Nation, and so they're always, closely watched during elections to see where the Navajo vote is being who they're supporting, rather. I hope that answers the question. Let's see if we have any more questions from the audience. It doesn't look like we have any just yet, but I do have another question for Robert. So since 2021, there has been this wave of legislation that makes it harder to, like it said in the film, to vote by mail, to vote early. But I also want to know where you think that, I guess, we can make the greatest impact. And we've sort of been talking about this already with getting familiar with grassroots movements in our areas. But is there something that you mentioned, an education toolkit? I guess, how do we get access to that? Who can use it? And what are the ways that you're seeing that these tools have been, or these resources are being used right now?
Well, thank you for the depth of the question. So first of all, as you said, these laws and regulations, they make it harder. They don't make it impossible, harder. And I like to think that the people that we work with and that care about this issue are willing to take on the harder battles and the harder fights. And knowing, as we say at the end of the film, if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't work so hard to prevent you from using it. So with that in mind, it's a version of what we've been talking about. So first of all, there's not a magic single pill. I wish there were. I wish we'd say, if you do X, we can fight back. But voter suppression is a state-by-state issue. It's different laws. It's different emphasis. It's different ways. What I tried to do in the film, and this was very conscious, is we made a list as the stories kept coming to us. And I said, well, how do we make it systemic without boring people, right? Can we find an individual human being who tells us each one of these stories, moving the polls or, voter ID, because they were subjected to it. So we have 5 or 6, 7 people, each one personifying a different aspect of voter suppression. Now, what does that say? It says that it is so widespread and it is so organized that we need to be similarly organized and take on individual pieces of voter suppression. So depending on your state, depending on your elected officials, depending on who are your voting monitors at the polls, what are the training programs, and then using the film. You can just go on TikTok and have a short clip, but if you want to have a screening, or even if you don't want to have a screening, if you email Carmen at bravenewfilms.org, who arranged tonight, she will make sure that you get either the voter suppression reflection guide, which, as I was saying before, is meant for faith communities, or the voter suppression discussion guide. You can do a screening in your home with 5 people. You can do a screening with your softball league with 10 people. You can do a screening in a bowling alley with 12 people. And you can get the free film, and you can also get the guide if you have any hesitation about doing a screening, or if you're just a good old solid introvert and want some guidelines, you can get the guide.
Thank you, Robert. And I think we have time for one more question. And Robert Dalton has asked a really great one. And they say, how do we get this vital, compelling content in front of those who are somehow still on the fence? How do we combat that sort of echo chamber?
Well, thank you for that question, because it's exactly why we're making the film free. Right? Think about it for a minute. Look, I love having my movies in movie theaters and seeing my name up there, and it feeds the ego. But what are the chances you're going to get people who are, to use Mr. Dalton's comment, on the fence to pay money to go to a movie theater to see something they're on the fence about? It's not going to happen. But because it's free, because it's widely available, so you go, let's say, with Mr. X, who's on the fence. He may not want to sit and watch a whole film. So what do? You start by sending him a little clip on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. Maybe he or she says, oh, that's interesting. And then you send another clip, or then you invite that person to a screening. The people on the fence are really a great audience for us. The reality is we're not going to get the people who solidly believe, despite all the evidence, that the election was stolen. That's not going to happen. But they're a significant minority. It's all the other people, from the ones who know what needs to be done to the ones who are on the fence. And we can impact them. And the last thing I'll say is, each of you may be thinking, oh, well, what can I do? I'm just an individual. There have been study after study showing that what's called in advertising land the trusted messenger theory. What does that mean? It means that, and we've all experienced that, when you get a message from a relative, a colleague, a friend, even somebody you don't like, you're going to pay more attention to that message than if it's sent to zillions of people by some nameless, faceless corporation. So if each and every one of you goes to your phone or goes to your computer and sends one of the links to 5 people, to 10 people, to 15 people with a little note, I just saw this film. I think you'll find it interesting. Hey, take a look. What do you think? Questions are good ways of engaging. You'll be astounded at how much impact that has versus some company just sending out a message that has no heart, no soul, and no personalization. You, every one of you, are those trusted messengers in your circle.
Well said, Robert. Thank you so much. And I see that there is one last question in the chat, and it's been answered. I was just going to say the Brennan Center has information on restoring voting rights in the state of Florida. So definitely check out their website.
Yes, very, very important and wonderful allies at the Brennan Center.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. I think that's all the time that we have for tonight. It has been really wonderful to talk with you. Thank you for making this film and for telling these stories or making them widely available to a larger audience.
Well, thank you, Shepard, for helping this happen. And I want to thank each and every one of you who've joined us on Zoom tonight. And I hope that each of you will make a decision to take one step forward. What is it? One step forward for mankind, one step forward for humankind. So thank you, and look forward to continuing to converse with you on an ongoing basis.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay.
Thanks everyone at Brave New Films and Red House production series. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.